Stop trying to manifest anything for the next few minutes. Instead, observe how your body contracts when you think about something absent from your life. That tightening reveals the control mechanism. Locate where that tension originates, and you can dissolve the input feeding scarcity, expanding into effortless receiving. Ready to test it? Some people work themselves into exhaustion, yet still feel they're falling behind. They upgrade skills, stay late, plan obsessively, and end each day sensing something's missing. That feeling doesn't arise because the world operates unfairly. It emerges from a quiet system running in the background, something most never realize they've programmed themselves to follow. This isn't about money, talent, or timing. It concerns the invisible filter determining what kind of reality you're even capable of perceiving. Scarcity functions as an inner operating system built around a single instruction. Only trust life when it behaves according to your plan. That conditional trust appears harmless initially, sounds like responsibility, discipline, perhaps wisdom. I'll relax when I finally have enough saved. I'll feel confident when I get that job. I'll open up when I'm sure they won't leave. Every statement sounds reasonable, yet each runs on identical flawed code. Trust only when you see proof first. Reality doesn't work in that order. Think of it like software taking your emotional input and running it through an outdated script. Conditional trust enters. The process generates control and anxiety. Out comes the result, another round of confirmation that you're not there yet. Conditional trust creates exhausting control that loops back into the output of lack. Your mind observes that output, says, "See, it never works out," and stores it as further evidence. You don't realize you're feeding your own data back into the program that generated it. Most people recognize it in small moments. You check your phone seeking a message, see nothing, and instantly feel hollow, convinced something's wrong. An hour later the message arrives but brings no relief, just a quick flash of finally before the loop resets. You've trained your emotions to follow conditions rather than presence. Someone building a new career keeps waiting for proof they're on the right path, but their doubt clouds perception so completely they miss positive signs entirely. The system can't display abundance when the inputs are coded for lack. Your brain maintains system consistency even when those systems no longer serve you. It operates like an emotional thermostat. Say you're accustomed to living at a steady level of doubt. The moment your trust rises above that familiar zone, your senses start scanning for threats. You'll interpret delays, missteps, or mistakes as warnings because the mind prefers returning to its known temperature rather than risking uncertainty. The scarcity loop attempts to self-correct back to safe. It's mechanical, not malicious. There's always a story behind the system. Someone grows up believing love must be earned, so they work overtime on every connection, proving worth, managing impressions, predicting reactions. It's exhausting, but they can't stop because they've linked control with safety. Maybe a person experienced unpredictable finances for years, so they hold every penny with a clenched fist. Even when more income arrives, they can't relax into it. The signal of scarcity lives in their body long after conditions have changed. Here's the twist. That feeling of being stuck isn't random. It's designed. Every "I need to know before I can trust" moment represents the system protecting its own stability. Once you see it that way, you stop fixing surface problems and start debugging the mechanism itself. You begin noticing where conditional trust sneaks in. That moment before you send the message, that hesitation before you apply, that tension before you let yourself enjoy what's already working. These aren't failures. They're system alerts. If this is a loop, then the question becomes, what happens when you interrupt the input itself? What happens when the first signal, the one saying, "I'll trust when I see proof," gets flipped into "I trust as the proof forms"? At that point, control has nothing left to feed on. The loop can't keep running without fuel. The system begins rewriting itself. Abundance stops being abstract and becomes something you actually experience in real time. Ever wonder why sometimes the harder you try, the worse things seem to get? You push, plan, organize every detail, but instead of relief you end up more anxious. Effort built on fear doesn't create progress. It broadcasts desperation. The energy meant to move you forward loops back, amplifying the same scarcity you're trying to outrun. The system remains tuned to the wrong signal. Control often resembles discipline from the outside, but underneath it's usually an emotional defense system. The mind's way of protecting you from uncertainty, keeping life predictable. You build routines, set alarms, double-check everything. Each measure really says, I don't trust this will work unless I handle it myself. The paradox: every time you tighten your grip, you remind your nervous system that letting go isn't safe. Control feels necessary, even though it keeps you in the same loop you're trying to escape. It resembles pulling on a rope meant to guide you forward. A gentle hold moves you easily, but the moment you panic and start yanking, it tightens. The harder you pull, the more it grips your hand, and suddenly you're not moving. You're tangled. That's what emotional control does. It's meant to help you steer life, but over time it just proves to you that flow can't be trusted. You stop cooperating with the current and start fighting it. From a neurological standpoint, this isn't random. Your mind predicts the future based on what it's already witnessed. If you've spent years expecting disappointment, it will project that forward, scanning for danger long before opportunity. You don't consciously decide that. It's a process running in the background. Neuroscientists call it predictive processing, but you experience it as self-fulfilling prophecy. The brain rehearses lack, and the emotional body plays along. Perception reinforces this. Confirmation bias keeps you looking for data fitting your expectations. If you believe life is hard, you notice every delay and overlook every ease. Emotional homeostasis keeps you feeling what's most familiar, even if uncomfortable. When hope rises, your body quietly corrects back to doubt the same way a thermostat drags temperature back to its setting. You think you're starting fresh, but you're replaying a memory disguised as today. A young professional bends over backward at work. Always first in, last out, desperate to prove their worth. Every project must be perfect, every email triple-checked. No matter how much praise they receive, they can't feel secure. Inside, they're still trying to earn permission to relax. The more they chase that sense of validation, the further it slips. Life mirrors them beautifully. New boss, new company, same dynamic. Each experience quietly repeats the pattern. That invisible structure has a price. The energy required to constantly control outcomes drains vitality. Your body runs in alert mode, even when you're sitting still. Sleep doesn't refresh you because the mind never stops managing tomorrow. Over time, it disconnects you from your natural timing. You stop noticing signals for when to rest, when to move, when something's ready. Your intuition still works, but the noise of control drowns it out. The system keeps replaying because you haven't yet recognized that the exhaustion is the feedback. That's the key shift. When you stop labeling these cycles as failure and start reading them as information, the loop becomes useful. The frustration shows you precisely where the system runs strongest. The fatigue reveals where trust has been replaced by vigilance. The lack of flow isn't punishment. It's instruction. It tells you you're pushing where you should be allowing. Once you interpret it that way, every trigger starts guiding you instead of blocking you. It's strangely freeing when you realize control wasn't wrong, just overused. It was meant to protect you until trust felt safe again. Seeing the feedback as a map out of limitation means you no longer have to attack the problem. You can adjust the input. That question, where do you place trust before proof, becomes the single leverage point that can start collapsing the entire scarcity system. From that moment, effort stops fighting against life and starts working with it. Abundance isn't something you chase, earn, or build up through harder work. It's something you allow. The real shift happens right at the input. When conditional trust turns into unconditional trust, the scarcity loop runs out of energy. The output starts updating itself because you've stopped feeding the system that kept regenerating lack. It's less about changing your outer world and more about rewiring how your inner signals get read. Unconditional trust sounds easy when life is stable, but when outcomes blur and timing feels uncertain, the mind wants to see proof first. It wants contracts before commitment, results before belief, comfort before release. That's why trust feels like a leap. It pushes against the brain's impulse to measure risk before every move. The old program demands evidence before comfort, yet abundance reverses that equation. It asks you to feel safe before seeing why. The brain resists that order, but the flow of life depends on it. Think about flying. When turbulence hits, the instinct is to grip harder, fix your eyes on the wings, manage every twitch of the plane. But there's an autopilot built for stability that can navigate movement with far more precision than human control ever could. Letting go and switching to that mode feels deeply uncomfortable at first because you're surrendering decision-making to a system you can't consciously monitor. Yet the moment you allow it, the flight steadies. Trusting life works in exactly that way. When you release manual control, your energy stops translating turbulence into danger and starts reading it as correction. You can tell when you've slipped back into manual mode because your body gives you signals. Notice when your shoulders tighten or your breath gets shallow. That contraction isn't proof that something's wrong. It's an indicator that the old scarcity system has reactivated. The rush of urgency saying, "Fix this now," is just code running a familiar pattern. Instead of fighting it, watch it. Give space to the discomfort without feeding it with action. Each time you pause before reacting, you teach the body that trust doesn't mean recklessness. It means allowing stability to reestablish itself without interference. Systems theory shows that a small change in a high-leverage point can transform an entire structure. In this case, that leverage point is trust. You don't have to overhaul your habits or rewrite your entire story. You only need to change where the system takes its first cue from. Shift the input from proof-seeking to trusting, and the feedback starts aligning automatically. You might not notice it immediately because the old loop will still test you with delays or mixed signals. But instead of reading these glitches as blocks, you begin to see them as recalibrations, proof that the output really is updating. Think of someone who's been in financial uncertainty for months. They apply for opportunities, chase clients, and nothing seems to click. One week they stop forcing outcomes. They start focusing on being of service, follow their intuition, reach out only when the timing feels light rather than pressured. Within days, a new contact reaches out or an unpaid invoice clears. It's perception. When trust opens, the brain relaxes enough to notice timing that was always there but filtered out by doubt. Surrender isn't passive. It isn't about waiting for luck to choose you. It's about recalibrating your internal signal so you can receive data from possibility instead of fear. You're not standing still. You're syncing with openness. In that space, your actions become sharper, more inspired, because they're no longer running through the filter of panic. The scarcity program loses authority once you stop trying to prove it wrong. When trust becomes the default input, scarcity stops being real data. It can appear as memory, but it no longer generates new outcomes. The system dissolves into one that favors flow, timing, and expansion. You begin noticing coincidences stacking in your favor. Conversations arriving at the right hour, people responding with ease instead of resistance. The output of abundance isn't created through effort. It's revealed through alignment. Something subtle shifts. You stop seeing yourself as someone trying to fix broken parts and start recognizing you've been a system calibrated for expansion all along. The myth of lack starts falling away, not because it failed, but because it fulfilled its original purpose. It led you back to the source input, where trust lives quietly waiting to be activated. Abundance doesn't drop into your life from the outside. It shows up when you stop fighting what is and start syncing with it. When your thoughts, emotions, and choices stop arguing with reality, you begin to notice flow replacing effort. The less you chase, the more life meets you halfway. That's the real call, not to push harder, but to trust deeper. When you stop asking when will it happen, and start feeling it's already forming, something unlocks. Your system quiets, and what you wanted starts unfolding naturally, drawn to your new frequency. The mechanism operating beneath this entire transformation deserves closer examination because understanding it changes everything. Your nervous system doesn't distinguish between actual threat and perceived threat. When you operate from conditional trust, constantly scanning for proof before relaxing, your body interprets that vigilance as danger response. Stress hormones circulate even when you're physically safe. Your digestion slows, your immune function drops, your creative thinking narrows. The body allocates resources for survival rather than thriving, and in that state, abundance becomes neurologically inaccessible. You're literally wired for scarcity at a biological level, which then confirms through your experience that scarcity is real. The loop runs deeper than thought patterns. It's encoded in your physiology. When you begin practicing trust before proof, you're not just changing your mindset. You're sending different signals to your autonomic nervous system. The parasympathetic response activates. Your body interprets this as safety, which allows expansion rather than contraction. Digestion improves, creativity flows, pattern recognition sharpens. You start noticing opportunities that were always present but previously invisible because your nervous system was too busy scanning for threats to register possibilities. This isn't mystical. It's basic neurobiology. Your perceptual field expands when your nervous system feels safe and contracts when it doesn't. Trust is the signal that tells your body it's safe to expand. The financial uncertainty example reveals something crucial about timing. When someone stops forcing and starts following intuition, they're not becoming passive. They're switching from effortful control to intelligent responsiveness. The mind in control mode operates from past patterns and future projections, missing the present moment where actual opportunities exist. Intuition operates in real time, reading subtle cues your conscious mind can't process quickly enough. That new contact or cleared invoice wasn't random luck. It was the natural result of being present enough to notice and act on timing that anxiety would have missed completely. Your intuition was always offering that guidance, but control was too loud to hear it. This connects to why surrender feels so counterintuitive. You've been conditioned to believe that constant management produces results, that relaxation leads to collapse. But observe how nature operates. Trees don't struggle to grow. Rivers don't force their way to the ocean. There's intelligence in the system itself, a coordination that happens when individual elements stop fighting the larger pattern. Your life contains that same intelligence, but you override it constantly with manual control. Surrender means stepping back enough to let that coordination function. It doesn't mean abandoning discernment or action. It means taking action from alignment rather than anxiety. The recalibration process isn't comfortable because your identity has been built around the control mechanism. When you start releasing control, you temporarily lose your sense of who you are. The person who constantly manages, plans, and anticipates suddenly has nothing to do with all that mental energy. There's a gap, a void where the old activity used to be. That void is precisely where the new version of you forms, but your mind interprets it as loss. This is why most people snap back into control before the transformation completes. They mistake the void for failure rather than recognizing it as necessary space for reorganization. Stay in the void. That's where the real work happens. What emerges from sustained trust practice is a different relationship with desire itself. Previously, Wanting something meant entering a state of lack, noticing the gap between current reality and desired outcome, then working to close that gap through force. But when trust becomes primary, desire transforms into magnetic pull rather than desperate reaching. You feel the pull towards something without the accompanying contraction of not having it yet. This shift changes the energetic signature of your wanting, which changes how reality responds to it. You're no longer broadcasting, "I don't have this and need it desperately." You're broadcasting, "This is forming and I'm available for its arrival." Those two signals produce entirely different outcomes. The system update isn't instantaneous because you're working against years of conditioning. Your body needs time to learn that safety isn't dependent on control. Your mind needs repeated experiences of trust producing positive outcomes before it will fully release its grip on vigilance. This is why the practice matters more than immediate results. Each time you pause before reacting, each time you notice the contraction and breathe through it instead of acting from it, you're rewiring neural pathways. You're teaching your system a new way of operating. The results might not show up in the moment of practice, but they're accumulating beneath the surface, reorganizing your baseline frequency. Eventually you reach a point where trust becomes more automatic than control. You still have access to strategic thinking and planning, but they arise from curiosity rather than fear. You can engage with challenges without your entire system going into emergency mode. Life's uncertainty stops feeling like threat and starts feeling like creative potential. When you don't know what's coming next, instead of anxiety, you feel anticipation. That shift marks the point where the scarcity system has truly dissolved and been replaced with something fundamentally different. You're operating from abundance, not as a concept you're trying to believe in, but as the actual felt experience of your daily existence. Everything flows from that foundation.